Okay, so we are welcome everybody to our 5th episode of Virtual Speaker Series. Today we have Louis Zarianis. He is a partner and litigation lawyer out in California, right? Is that right, Louis?
Yes, outside San Francisco.
Okay, great. So just for our viewers, I'm Paul Gazzone, Dr. Paul Gazzone. I'm one of the assistant principals at Oceanside High School. This is my partner is Dr. Glickman Rogers. She's the principal at Oceanside Middle School. And, we're excited to be back for a second week. Now, Louis, just so you know, like we're not in our offices, we're in our place offices. And we'd like to try to keep it a little light, have some fun. And so please don't refer to me as Dr. Gazzone and Allison as Dr. Glickman Rogers. So, it's Paul and it's Allison. And, we'll have a great time. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a quick shout out to your sister and twin, Beth Zarianis, right? So she's excited to see her twin brother live. Okay. And again, just quick shout out to some of our viewers. Charles Wang, thanks for being here as always. Vincent Capone, good to see you again. Miss Declo, nice to see you. And Joe, good to see you. So we're excited to do this and thank you for coming back. So for the first time, I actually think we are not only live on YouTube Live, but I also believe that we're live on Twitter. So you can catch us on either platform right now. So Louis, why don't you just start off and talk to us about your background? So you're a litigation lawyer, your partner also. So kind of break down those two things for us.
Sure. So I'm, as you said, a litigation lawyer and partner at a global law firm based in San Francisco. Essentially, I lead a team of lawyers under me that work on behalf of client matters, both in court matters and then what they call investigation matters. So essentially, for example, right now I have litigation matters on behalf of big technology clients in California State Court, in New York State Court, and then also in federal court in Michigan. So essentially, clients will come to me and say they have a problem or they have a dispute that needs to be addressed. Either they're being sued by someone or they need to sue someone. So for example, you have a client, it's a technology client that has a contract to do certain work for another big company, and they do those services and perform those services under the contract and they don't get paid. What do? Essentially, in that regard, you go to a law firm and say, listen, I have a case, I have a possible matter, I have a concern, I'm owed $5 million for the work that I've done in this contract, and I'm not being paid. So that's one part of my practice as a lawyer, as a litigation lawyer. The other part of my... Go ahead.
Can you just, the word litigation, right? Big fancy word. What does that component actually mean?
Sure. Litigation essentially is a form of resolving a dispute. So essentially you're being asked to, as a lawyer, talk with the person or entity that you have a dispute with to try to resolve that dispute. So the first part of litigation is essentially working to try to resolve that dispute with the other party. And then ultimately, if you can't resolve that dispute, then you have to figure out what the next step would be. In a lot of cases, that's going to court and filing a case in court. Or if you have a problem with a party, they file a case against you in court, you have to go defend your client in court. And that's essentially, filing an answer to what they call a complaint. A complaint is, these are the things that you've done wrong. These are the things that are a problem from our perspective. Why you owe us, for example, the $4 million or $5 million example, why you owe us $5 million. And we have to go on behalf of my client and say, I don't owe the $5 million. These are the reasons why I don't owe the $5 million. And that is the first part of what would be called a court case, where there's an answer and a complaint and an answer. The complaint is what the problem is. The answer is why there's no problem. And then that goes from that part to a lot of what they call discovery. And discovery will be looking at documents that are relevant. So in this case of the breach of contract, or the contract case, would be the contract, emails around what the contract means, emails around, did I actually perform the services under the contract, or was there a problem? So there's an exchange of documents and information, and then ultimately additional documents are filed by the parties, what they call motions, or there's actually a trial. And the judge and a jury will hear all of that evidence, the documents, your claims, the defenses of the other side, and will make a determination, either the $4 million is owed, or the $4 million is not owed, or part of the $4 million is owed, and this is why the part of the $4 million is owed. So that's essentially breaking it down from the original, we have a dispute, we're going to try to resolve that dispute, and between the two of us, if we can't resolve that dispute, we go to some form of court action, or again, not to get too complicated, but some form of arbitration, which is like a court action, but not before a judge, before an arbitrator, and there are different rules. It's a little bit, to keep it more basic, it's try to resolve it amongst yourselves. If you can't resolve it, there's either a court action or some arbitration, and hopefully you get a resolution from that.
Okay. So essentially, if Allison and I had an agreement of some sort, that we wrote it down on paper, and if Allison broke the agreement, because I would never break an agreement, one of us would, and one of us kind of challenged that agreement. One of us would hire you to represent us, and the other person would hire someone else, and you and this other lawyer would essentially debate the validity of the agreement, and if either one of us kind of follow through on either end, right? So that sounds like an amazing and an awesome career. So tell me, what do you find most interesting about your job?
Right. So for me, it's really the variety of the types of cases that do come across my desk, and the variety of the types of clients that I get to see on a regular basis. And that keeps it extremely interesting. So my practice is varied. I have, again, types of those cases, breach of contract cases, but I also have a number of cases where clients hire me to conduct what they call investigations. And I've done investigations for clients all over the world. I've been in Jakarta, Indonesia, in Singapore, all over Latin America, where there's an issue that the client has identified in its own company. So it's like you have company X, and company X thinks that maybe there's a fraud and an employee has stolen money, $20, $30 million. Someone in the accounting department was able to write themselves a check and steal from the company $10, $15 million. And the client would call me and say, we think we have an issue. We can't find this money. We think the employee X has taken this money. Can you come and investigate this for us? So that happens happens for companies all over the world. And that's another part of my practice, which is to go into that company, talk to the employees. Again, the same sort of looking at documents, looking at emails, and trying to understand what happens. So keeping it variety of types of cases, like the breach of contract case or this type of investigation, keeps it very interesting. And then working for clients, small little companies out here in California, to some of your household names. Clients that, and again, I'm not at liberty to talk about the clients we represent from, but clients that you would look at and say, wow, that's a household name for us. So it's really been a good mix of both clients and types of matters that I'm able to work on.
So, and it sounds like a very complex job. Can you hone in on some of the skills that you have, or that are
very interesting
to be a litigation lawyer?
I didn't. There's a little bit of a sort of delay, so I didn't hear the question. I apologize.
I was asking about the type of skills that you need to be a litigation lawyer. It's obviously, and it seems that you explained it's a very complex job. But what are some of the skills that you would consider your strengths that allow you to be a successful litigation attorney?
Sure. So a large part of the job requires really strong writing skills and really strong analytical skills. So to take a problem and really digest that problem and sort of break it apart into what the different aspects of each of the different types of problems are that you're dealing with. That's a big part of it. And then the ability to write persuasively and to write succinctly, so that when the other side that you're working on against, or working with against, or the court, or whatever the ultimate decision maker is, that they have a very concise, well-written and well-reasoned document that makes your point very clear and crystal. There's no debate. So it's really good, strong writing skills and really, really strong analytical thinking skills and reasoning skills. But then there's also, in order to be successful in this type of a job, you need great executive skills. You need to be able to learn, you need to be able to prepare and really set deadlines for yourself internally. And you need to also be able to synthesize and be able to sort of organize yourself in a way that you're dealing with potentially thousands of documents. You're dealing with 5 or 6 arguments, legal arguments you want to make, and you're dealing with a number of different information inputs. So the ability to really organize that and then to prepare and not wait till the last minute. If you have a court deadline, on June 6th, you don't want to be looking at this stuff on June 4th for the first time. You need to be able to look at these things and put some self-discipline around the way in which you're organizing yourself to make sure that by June 6th, not only is the document the best that it can be, well-reasoned and well-written, but you also have a stakeholder, your client. Your client wants to read that. Your client wants to review that before it gets filed with a court. So you can't also give it to your client the day before it's due and say, read this now. Your client has obligations and your client has time commitments. So you need to be able to manage your time in a way that you're not only reviewing the information along the way as you're getting it, but that also you're preparing yourself to give your stakeholders time to review and time to read something before you actually finalize and file it. So it's a lot of organizational skills that, frankly, I wish when I was in high school, I focused more on. It's one of the things that looking back in my scholastic history through college and law school and even high school, I wish that I had better preparation and organizational skills along the way. You see how critical it is in every really professional job. And that's something that I think is a really important thing to impress upon students, that it's not only about, understanding the material, but it's about making sure on your own, you're able to balance the internal deadlines, balance your studies, such that at finals time, for example, you're not cramming the last minute with every single subject. You set yourself up for success through those types of, self deadlines and self-discipline.
Sure. So it sounds like, time management, prioritizing, a lot of the soft skills are super important for your job, right? So I'm gonna ask you to do a Marty McFly, right? Get into that time machine, and we're gonna go back to middle school, right? So I want you to think about those experiences and kind of maybe share with us some of the skills that you developed there that kind of helped you on your path to be where you are right now. And maybe it's not just skills, but experiences, right? Because experiences are so important. So it's kind of walk us through maybe, what you can remember from middle school and then high school and how those experiences may have influenced you in any way, maybe not professionally, but also on a personal level.
Right. Well, I can tell you, since Beth's probably listening, that I have to be frankly and completely candid and honest on these things. I was a very last minute person when I was in middle school, high school, and even college. I waited to the last minute, and I learned from that. I mean, as time went on, you see that that's not necessary. You can only do so well in that respect. So if you have 5 or 6 substantive classes in middle school for the first time, I wish, again, looking back, I do think that, there was some level of prioritization to know when things were due and to know how much time I needed, time management and prioritization, how much time I needed to write that social studies paper or prepare for that, science test. And those are things that, again, when you look at your week and you're planning out your week of work that you need to do, you have to fit in your classwork, which is in school, the homework that is due any given night, but then longer looking existing projects and tests, and make sure you're incorporating time to do those in your nightly work, such that when you get to the day the paper's due on that Friday, or the test is that Friday, on Thursday night, you're not opening the book for the first time and saying, oh, I have a biology test tomorrow. I better read Unit 2 right now. That's something that, I mean, I can tell you, as time went on for me, from middle school to high school to college to law school, you begin to realize that you need even more time to actually prepare for those end sort of documents and tests. And starting out in middle school is the right time to really start that planning and time management skills, so that it's really second nature to you as you go to high school and college and then beyond, if that's what you want to do. 100%. But I had many times when I was up all night in middle school because I hadn't planned it and I hadn't managed it appropriately. And you learn from that and you say, this is not, I can't be doing this on a regular basis. It's too stressful. You don't get it done.
I'm glad to hear you saying this. And, for the middle school students who are listening, this doesn't come naturally to an adolescent brain. It's not the way the adolescent brain is wired. They're not quite as developed as a high school or post-high school student is when it comes to those executive functioning skills. But it is important to be aware that it isn't a strength and something that middle school students need to work harder at. Like, we need to be more intentional about looking at the calendar, setting aside time each day for a particular task leading up to final assignments or assessments, that type of thing, because it doesn't come naturally. And middle school teachers, we know that, but it doesn't come so easily to our students. We need to be reminded every now and again that we need to provide some real direct instruction to help students develop these executive functioning skills, because we always say middle school, is the foundation. And if we don't develop these skills while we're in middle school, it'll be harder in high school and we'll be playing catch up, So I'm glad to hear you say it. And maybe right now, while the students are home, those of you that are listening, definitely a good time to start looking at your assignments for the week. You're going to go have the time now to practice planning out all of your tasks. And when we get back to school, Mr. Gazzone will put this on our list of things to do.
Right. Sure. No, and I'll tell you look at it, the leeway you gets shorter and shorter as you progress.
Good point.
So middle school, there's probably some more leeway because you're learning. High school, there's less leeway. College and law school, there's very little leeway. You're not going to be able to get that time back. And in a job like mine, if I miss a deadline, I'm going to get fired. And I might actually get sued for malpractice. So you see how the deadlines really start to, and that time management becomes essential, and the leeway in which you have for missing that or not incorporating time management gets more and more harsh and severe as you progress.
So we really need to take advantage of the opportunity during the middle school years to develop these skills in an environment that's more forgiving and understanding.
Right. Agreed.
So everyone understanding that our end game is to develop these really important life skills. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think also our students and us as educators were actually potentially at a greater advantage than when we were in middle school, because we didn't have tech and computers and phones where we could kind of put them in our calendars and say, this is due on Wednesday, and get a beep and an alert, right? We would have to kind of use the old school planners, write them down. Maybe we would lose them and not know when things were due. So in some ways, it's really like, all our students from, down up elementary school to the high school, they have a little bit of advantage. We just need to work together to make sure we're using those things in an effective manner, because I believe even when you get to your professional level, those practices will help you be more in order and on time and efficient in what we do every day. So it's an interesting perspective.
Absolutely.
So Louis, talk to us about your path to being where you are. So and maybe different careers that you've participated in prior to attaining where you are right now.
Sure. So the path was, it's not, for me, I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be a lawyer. I didn't, even in college, I didn't say to myself, I want to be a lawyer. In fact, in college, I had thought about going into either becoming a psychologist or a doctor. And then it was actually seeing some legal proceedings and some class trip that said to myself, wow, this is something that's really interesting to me. I'm really, really interested in maybe looking at this as a potential career path. So for me, I mean, I didn't wake up in middle school or high school one day and say, oh, I want to be a lawyer and put my path on that sort of track. I did know that I wanted to go to college. I did know that I wanted to hopefully move on from college and do something beyond college. I just wasn't sure what exactly that was going to look like. But from my perspective, the tools in order to get to college and beyond didn't necessarily change the way I approached it. If I wanted to be a doctor versus a lawyer versus an educator versus a psychologist, for example, it was hard work, dedication, and sort of prioritization of, learning. And for me, learning was the key. I wanted to continue to learn and to grow. And then once I had a foundation of a lot of different things that I was learning about, I sort of made some decisions. It was through a class trip in college to watch a Supreme Court argument that made me realize, wow, this is something that to me is really cool. Back then, that's how I looked at it. It was cool. Now I look at it a little bit more scholastically as a lawyer. But back then I was like, wow, this is a cool experience. Maybe this is what I want to do. So again, it was not to box yourself out of things that you may want to consider, or not to limit the things that you end up learning from taking classes in high school to taking classes in college, to broaden that experience, because you really never know where life's going to take you. The one constant and consistent sort of theme, as I said, was hard work, time management, trying to do the best that I could do in the classes that I was taking, and then ultimately make a decision on what was the right path for me. That's essentially sort of the path that I took. When I made a decision to go to law school late in college, there's testing you need to take. So obviously there's just like getting into college, there's SATs, there's obviously classes you need to take and tests you need to take for law school. So that obviously was something that I did and prepared for as well. And then even when I got into law school, I really didn't know what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. I said, well, I'm in law school now. And I think for me, it's a good education. You can do a lot of things as a lawyer. You can be a lawyer. You can be a politician. There's a lot of different sort of things that you can do with a legal degree. You can go teach at a law school. You can be an educator in a law school in some capacity and teach. So there were things that I thought were possible avenues. But again, even while I was in law school, I didn't stop the learning. Over the summertime, I went and worked for a federal judge to see what that was like. I went and worked for a company in their acquisitions department to see what that type of law was like. I continued to sort of grow and learn all different things without necessarily pigeonholing myself into one thing versus another, so that when I actually made a decision, I want to be a litigator, I felt comfortable with that decision. I'd seen other things. I had some experiences doing other types of legal work, and I felt comfortable that was the path that I was taking, essentially.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you is that you're really taking advantage of some experiential learning opportunities, right? So you've been in some situations, real life situations, and you said, hey, well, this is cool. Maybe this is what I want to do with my life. Or you visited a different department and you said, no, you know what? I'm happy I was here because I definitely don't want to do that. And I think that's something as school leaders, Allison and I know there a lot of us and are pretty much all of us in the Oceanside team, like we believe in providing students with experiential learning opportunities and really encourage, all our students to join clubs and go on trips and maybe go for internships and externships, because all those experiences are important in the learning process, because sometimes, right, you may, I want to go be a doctor, but it's just as important to go visit maybe a teacher's classroom and say, you know what, this is a great profession, but it's not for me. Not knowing what you don't like is just as important as knowing what you like. And that's something we always encourage our students to do, is take advantage of that.
Paul, I have a perfect example. When I was in college, I was a psych major in college. And actually I was doing really, really well. And one of the leads of the department said, we're affiliated with this entity called, or this facility called the Derner Institute out in Long Island. And we'd like you to do this internship with children and adolescents that suffer from various disorders, conduct disorder and ADHD. And can you go and sort of intern and work at that facility? And I was like, this is great. And this is sort of, I want to spend all summer doing this. I did it over the summer. I came back realizing I do not want to be a psychologist. in no way, shape, or form do I want to do this. And I switched. I changed. I mean, that was something that for me was extraordinarily beneficial. It's an experience I'll never forget. But sitting in that job or internship day to day, dealing with the kids that I was dealing with, all had amazing stories. I really started to think about, is this really what I want to do with my life? And my answer essentially was no. This is not what I can't envision myself doing this for the rest of my life. So that was an example right there in college of taking advantage of that experiential learning experience and internship that actually shifted my focus to doing something else.
That's great. So when we think of law, right? So you're a litigation lawyer, but it's a big field, right? So it's not just litigation. There's different areas of law, right? So can you maybe speak to your knowledge about the different areas of law that if someone who is interested in entering this field, they're aware that it's not just like, litigation of breach of contracts, right? So what are essentially the different areas of law?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the big areas you break up the law into is essentially litigation, which captures all types of disputes, right? Whether it's breach of contract or even criminal cases is considered litigation. I do a fair amount of criminal work for white collar criminals where they're arrested and indicted. That's also part of litigation. The other parts of law, really, when you break it up, are transactional, what they call transactional lawyers or corporate lawyers, which essentially work on big deals and transactions. When, for example, two major companies are going to come together and become one company, your Sprint and your T-Mobile, they both need lawyers on each side, what they call M&A lawyers or mergers and acquisition lawyers, to understand the different types of synergies those two companies will have together, how those two companies will work together, and the legal sort of aspects of combining those two companies. It's a really big sort of vast area of law that has a lot of components to it, but they generally call that your mergers and acquisitions. And you're working on transactions from those types of big sort of merger type deals to smaller breach of contract deals. So for example, in the litigation example I gave, where there was a breach of this $4 million contract, there was a transactional lawyer working on that before I got involved that worked with the parties that work. So let's say company X was going into an agreement with company Y. Company X had a transactional lawyer, company Y had a transactional lawyer, and they negotiated the terms and conditions of that agreement. You're going to get paid $4 million if this thing is delivered, if this work is completed. That's transactional lawyers from big to small. You also have intellectual property lawyers. That's out here in California, where I'm based, is a really important legal area. Lawyers, and a lot of times intellectual property lawyers are also engineers, and there's a separate.
So when you say intellectual property, can you just break that down just a little bit for us?
So intellectual property essentially is when you have a software product, for example, and you're trying to sell that software product to the consumers, all of the different things that make up your software product that are personal to that company. So for example, big tech company Z wants to roll out a new phone, and they have internally designed and developed software. They have internally designed and developed the phone itself, the different features of the phone. Those are all part of that company's what they call intellectual property, things that are specific to that company that they've developed for their products that they're going to sell to their consumers. So ultimately, to break it down in simplistic terms, you have a list of those features and traits, and you have to go try to get those protected so that no one else can sort of steal those or use those or try to compete with you. And there's a lot of work that goes into developing those applications to get those features specific to your company. Those are sort of patent applications. And then ultimately, if you think someone is using your technology, think about this. Companies have people. And if one person works for company Y and they know some of the secret sauce, some of the secret software features that company Z's phone has, and they go to another company and then they say, listen, I was at company Z, they were doing, this type of thing and this type of thing. And then the other company the guy goes to says, oh, we're going to do that too. Then there is a problem because now the employee or the person has taken that information from company Z and given it to somebody else. And there's lawyers that specialize in trying to stop that from happening and trying to get that information back to the company Z and not allowing the other company to use that technology. So that's intellectual property. And it's a global practice. It's it's really big in the California Bay Area specifically, but there's special lawyers that do that, and they're very specialized. Those are the big three areas: are IP, transactional litigation. You also have labor and employment, which again is another big specialty of the law, where again, when you have employees that work for a big company, employees are entitled to get paid if they have a contract to get paid. They're entitled to a certain number of days off. They're entitled if there's employees that have disabilities. So there's another area of law that people consult on for employee rights or even company rights to say, as a company, you can't treat your employees this way, or as an employee, you're entitled to get this from your company. So those are the big four areas of the law.
Okay. So when I think of sports and I think of players signing multi-million-dollar deals, right? We all know that there's some big money to be made in that area. So I'm sure each party has lawyer representation, and based on your definition, that I guess would be considered transactional law.
Yes, it's exactly. Well, they classify it as it's cool in certain respects as sports law, but essentially it's a form of transactional. It would fit in any law firm's transactional practice. We have my current firm is a very large sports law dealing with athletes and teams themselves on negotiation of contracts and things of that nature. Yes, that would be a transactional practice. And there is also litigation that gets involved if, for example, when Alex Rodriguez, for example, was considered a breach of his agreement for testing positive to certain, performance enhancement drugs, that would be a litigation matter. So sports law can sort of primarily starts with transactional practice, but can morph into having someone involved in litigation or arbitration as well.
Oh, that's cool to know. So listen, Lewis, we've been on here for a half hour. It's 1 o'clock. We thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you want to just kind of wrap up with or share, just recommendations to our students and our viewers?
Sure. But my recommendation is, you don't know where life's going to take you. And my recommendation is to just work as hard as you can, and everything you do, put your best foot forward and your best effort, and hopefully the results will come. And if you feel like the results are not coming, seek the help of the people that care and support you, your teachers and your mentors and your counselors at school or your parents. But I mean, the school environment is a place that's conducive to learning. And I know the people on this meeting, they care. And they care about the development and the success of the students. And success is defined in many different ways. Essentially, it's really just you achieving as a student the things you want to achieve. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Ultimately, the questions you don't ask may hurt you. So ask away and ask for as much help and as many questions as you have. That's my recommendation.
All right. Allison?
Mr. Gazzone, I can't help. I have to give a shout out to the ELA teachers who definitely, starting in elementary school, start teaching children how to do persuasive writing, right, and providing evidence. And it's just a great example. You don't know where it'll take you, right? Like, this is your job heavily relies on a skill that you probably started to develop as an elementary school writer. So, students, you have to be, everything we do has a purpose and a reason, and you want to take advantage of all the experiences, because in the end, everything you're learning in middle school will be the foundation for your future learning experiences and career opportunities.
All right. So we're going to end on that note. Again, thank you, Lewis, for being part of this. Tomorrow we have former Oceanside resident, a graduate, Jay Feeler, former NFL quarterback. So we're excited to have him on. And on Wednesday we have Andrew Maller from Allstate Insurance. So, we're looking for another good week. And again, thank you for everyone for participating. Bye-bye.
I'm glad I went before him.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.